Now, there was a huge response to our story yesterday about caravans, about people who say that they've lost huge amounts of money after buying static caravans on holiday parks. Thanks for all of the messages, and there were a lot, and they're still coming in this afternoon, actually. Just a few, first of all. Susan says that we paid £54,000 for our caravan. 3 years on, we needed to sell up. The caravan was in perfect condition. The site gave us £11,000, and a few weeks later they put it up for sale at £48,000. Ken says, I don't see why a site should be able to interfere in a private sale. The owner is paying site fees, council tax and utility bills. Should the site be allowed to dip their fingers in the sale pie to make enormous profits when they resell the van? Phil and Denise say buying a static caravan is a lifestyle, not an investment. We love just getting away for a few days, really enjoy it. Well, the British Holiday and Home Parks Association, which represents holiday parks, told the BBC that it's important that consumers read the small print and fully understand the sales contract before committing to buying a caravan. Well, Hugh Preston is a barrister who's been working with the Holiday Park Action Group, and he's joining us now. Mr. Preston, good evening to you. Good to have you on the programme. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Good evening.
Is this story of losing many thousands of pounds on a static home in just a few years, is that quite common?
I couldn't give you statistics on how common it is, but I've certainly seen a large number of cases where exactly that has happened, with very similar stories to the one that you just mentioned.
Is it legal for a park to buy back a van and then sell it on at a much higher price? Because that's winding a lot of people up.
Well, the key issues here are fairness and transparency. It's not so much the selling of the caravan and the buying back by the park owner, that the focus legally really ought to be on the point where the owner buys the caravan in the first place on day one. That's where the transparency and the candor needs to come in. Because, of course, the typical consumer who buys a caravan for 50, 100,000, sometimes 200,000 or more, might perhaps expect there to be some depreciation, because a used caravan wouldn't be as worth as much as a brand new caravan. But the levels of depreciation that they actually suffer after 2 or 3 years of perhaps over 50% is clearly beyond any foreseeability.
Is it important to study and read every single word on the agreement when you buy one, however excited you are about the fact that you've done a deal?
Well, plainly, as a lawyer, I would always advise everybody to read every single word of every contract. But in reality, of course, that's not what consumers generally do. But to be honest, that's not really the solution here, because it's not so much the terms of the contract. It's the fact that you don't realize when you buy your caravan, but if you sell it 2 or 3 years later, you might have paid £100,000 for it, and suddenly you find you've got something that might only be worth £15,000 or £20,000. Reading the contract isn't going to solve that difficulty. What needs to happen is full disclosure by the vendor, the seller of the caravan, as to the fact that you realize you're taking on this asset. Fine if you keep it long term, you use it for many years, have your holidays, etc. If for any reason you need to terminate the license and sell after perhaps 2 or 3 years, people need to be aware that they're going to suffer potentially that sort of loss.
And just briefly, when you hear stories like I've heard over the last 24 hours and we've talked about tonight, it makes you wonder why anybody buys one.
Well, I think that's an entirely fair question, but I think those who do buy it in part precisely because they're not aware that after 2 or 3 years, the price might come tumbling down to quite that level. And on this is an issue where the law for those who buy on finance, the law is rather more protective for them. There are good, useful safety measures in place in the consumer protection legislation.
You've raised some really interesting points tonight. It'd be very helpful for many people and food for thought. Mr. Preston, good to have you on the programme. Thank you very much indeed. Most grateful.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for all the emails. Now, later